My stepmom tore my passport so that I can't go to Turkey with my dad. But then my dad did something which shocked my stepmom. I, 18F, just turned 18 yesterday, and my dad, John, 45M, threw me a birthday party at our house. He invited our neighbors and some family members. It was a nice gesture, and I appreciated the effort he put into making my day special. I live with my dad, my stepmom Amelia, 40F, and my stepbrother Caleb, 14M. My dad loves me a lot, and we've always been close, especially since my mom passed away when I was younger. My relationship with Amelia, however, is complicated. She doesn't like me, though she's careful never to show it in front of my dad. I've known this for years, but I've never told my dad about it. I want him to be happy, and I don't want to bother him with what might seem like petty family drama. Plus, I'm afraid he might not believe me, or it could cause problems in his marriage. So I've always kept quiet about it. There have been several incidents over the years that have shown me Amelia's true nature. When I was 15, I got really sick at school. I had a high fever and couldn't stop throwing up. The school nurse called home to have someone pick me up. Amelia answered the phone, and I heard her tell the nurse she was too busy to come get me. She said she had errands to run and couldn't be interrupted. I ended up having to wait at school for 3 hours, lying on a cot in the nurse's office until my dad could leave work early to come get me. When he arrived, he was upset that Amelia hadn't called him to let him know I was sick. She just shrugged and said she figured the school would call him if it was really important. Another time, when I was 16, Amelia threw away a box of my mom's old things that I kept in my closet. It had some of Mom's jewelry, old letters she'd written to my dad when they were dating, and a scarf that still smelled like her perfume. When I realized it was gone and confronted Amelia, she claimed she thought it was trash. She said she'd seen an old box in my room while cleaning and assumed I didn't want it anymore. When I got upset, she just shrugged and said I should have kept it somewhere safer if it was so important. I cried for hours that day, and even though my dad tried to comfort me, I could tell he didn't want to believe Amelia had done it on purpose. Last year, I overheard Amelia talking to Caleb when they thought I wasn't home. She was telling him that he was her real child and that she only put up with me for my dad's sake. She said she couldn't wait until I went off to college so they could be a real family without me around. It hurt to hear that, especially since I've always tried to be nice to both of them, even when Amelia was cold to me. Amelia's also forgotten to do my laundry multiple times, even when doing everyone else's. She'll wash and fold clothes for my dad and Caleb, but leave mine in the hamper. When I ask about it, she always has an excuse. She didn't see my clothes. She thought I wanted to do my own laundry. She was going to get to it later. It's a small thing, but it's just another way she makes me feel unwelcome in my own home. When I was applying to colleges last fall, Amelia conveniently misplaced some of my application materials. I had asked her to mail a couple of packets for me while I was at school, and she said she would. But when I followed up with the schools, they said they never received my applications. I missed deadlines for 2 schools I really wanted to attend because of this. When I confronted Amelia, she acted confused and said she must have forgotten to mail them. She apologized, but it didn't seem sincere. I couldn't prove she'd done it on purpose, but given her pattern of behavior, I had my suspicions. Despite all this, I've tried to keep the peace for my dad's sake. He seems happy with Amelia, and I don't want to be the cause of problems in their marriage. So I've learned to keep my head down, avoid Amelia when I can, and count the days until I can move out for college. On my birthday, after the party was over and most of the guests had left, my dad surprised me by announcing that we're going on a trip to Turkey. I was shocked and excited because I've always wanted to go to Turkey. It was a dream I shared with my real mom before she passed away. My mom loved Turkish culture and had always wanted to visit Turkey with my dad and me. She used to tell me stories about the beautiful mosques in Istanbul, the otherworldly landscapes of Cappadocia, and the crystal clear waters of the Turkish Riviera. We'd spend hours looking at travel magazines and planning our dream trip. I remember sitting with my mom when I was about 6 or 7, flipping through a big, glossy book about Turkey. She'd point out pictures of the Blue Mosque and the Hagia Sophia, telling me about their history and architecture. We'd look at photos of the Grand Bazaar, imagining ourselves wandering through the colorful stalls, bargaining for carpets and spices. Mom would describe the taste of authentic Turkish delight, promising we'd try every flavor when we finally made it there. Her eyes would light up when she talked about watching the sunset over the Bosphorus, or taking a hot air balloon ride over the fairy chimneys of Cappadocia. It became our shared dream, something we'd talk about whenever one of us was feeling down or needed cheering up. We even started a savings jar for our turkey fund, and I'd put in my allowance money every week. But unfortunately, Mom had a car accident when I was 8 and died in the hospital a few days later. It was sudden and devastating. My dad was heartbroken, and so was I. We leaned on each other a lot during that time, trying to cope with our grief and figure out how to move forward without her. In the months after Mom died, Dad and I would sometimes look at those same travel magazines and books about Turkey. It became a way for us to remember Mom and feel close to her. We'd talk about her excitement for the trip, and promise each other that we'd go someday in her memory. It was painful, but it also gave us something to look forward to, a goal to work towards in her honor. But life has a way of getting in the way of plans. Sometimes we didn't have enough money for such a big trip. Other times, Dad's work made it impossible for him to take enough time off. We talked about maybe going for my high school graduation, but then the pandemic hit, and international travel became complicated. 4 years after my mom's death, when I was 12, my dad started dating again. That's when he met Amelia. At first, I was cautiously optimistic. I wanted my dad to be happy, and Amelia seemed nice enough in the beginning. But as she spent more time with us, I realized she didn't share our love of travel. She preferred staying close to home and complained whenever Dad suggested even a short trip out of state. This put our turkey plans on hold indefinitely. Amelia always had a reason why we couldn't go. It was too expensive, too far, too dangerous. She'd suggest we go to a local beach instead, or maybe take a road trip to the next state over. It was clear she didn't understand how important this trip was to Dad and me. Still, Dad and I never completely gave up on our dream of visiting Turkey together someday. We'd still talk about it sometimes, usually when Amelia wasn't around. It became our secret project, something just between us that kept us connected to Mom's memory. So when Dad announced the trip on my birthday, I was absolutely thrilled. It felt like a dream come true, a promise finally being fulfilled. But my excitement was tempered when Dad mentioned that only he and I would be going, while Amelia and Caleb would stay at home. Don't get me wrong, I was happy it would just be Dad and me. It felt right, given the history of the trip and its connection to my mom, but I also immediately worried about how Amelia would react. Sure enough, Amelia got quite angry and jealous. At first, she tried to play it cool, asking questions about the trip as if she was just curious, but I could see the tension in her face and the way her hands were clenched at her sides. Finally, she couldn't hold it in anymore and started a verbal fight with my dad. She said it wasn't fair that she and Caleb were being left out. She accused my dad of favoring me over his new family and said I was too old for daddy-daughter trips. "We're supposed to be a family now, John," she yelled. "How do you think it makes Caleb feel to be excluded like this? And what about me? Am I just the babysitter while you go off and play happy family with your daughter?" Dad tried to explain that this was a special trip, something he and I had been planning for years, long before he met Amelia. He told her about Mom's love for Turkey and how this trip was partly in her memory, but this only seemed to make Amelia angrier. "So, that's it then," she spat. 10 years later, and I'm still competing with a ghost? When are you going to let her go and focus on the family you have now?" I stood there, feeling awkward and guilty, even though I knew I shouldn't. Caleb had retreated to his room, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. The argument escalated, voices getting louder and louder. Suddenly, Amelia grabbed my passport from the table where Dad had put it earlier when he was showing me our itinerary. Before anyone could react, she tore it in half. We all stood there in shock for a moment. I couldn't believe what I'd just seen. Dad's face went red with anger, and he started yelling at Amelia, asking how she could do something so childish and spiteful. Amelia yelled back that she was sick of always coming second to his precious memories of my mom. She said she'd put up with it for years, but she was done being the villain in our family story. "If you walk out that door with her," Amelia screamed, gesturing at the torn passport on the floor, "don't bother coming back." Dad was so angry that he walked out of the house, saying he needed to clear his mind. The slam of the front door echoed through the suddenly quiet house. I couldn't bear to stay downstairs with Amelia, so I ran up to my room and locked the door. As I sat on my bed, I could hear Amelia and Caleb talking downstairs. Amelia was saying that I had ruined everything by not including them in the trip. She told Caleb not to worry, that she'd make sure Dad canceled the whole thing. I felt a mix of emotions: anger at Amelia for ruining what should have been a happy moment, disappointment that our long-awaited trip might not happen, and guilt for being the cause of so much family drama. Part of me wondered if I was being selfish. Should I have insisted that Amelia and Caleb come too? Would that have made things better or worse? I know the trip was meant to be special for Dad and me, a way to honor Mom's memory and fulfill a long-held dream. But now I'm not sure what to do. I don't want to cause problems in my dad's marriage, but I also feel like Amelia crossed a line by destroying my passport. That's not something a reasonable adult does, no matter how upset they are. Dad hasn't come home yet, and I'm not sure what's going to happen now. Part of me still really wants to go on this trip. It's been our dream for so long, and it feels like this might be our last chance to do it, just the two of us, before I head off to college and our lives get even more complicated. But another part of me wonders if it's worth all this drama. Maybe I should just tell Dad to cancel the whole thing when he gets back. We could use the money to do something local, something that includes Amelia and Caleb. It wouldn't be the same, but at least it might keep the peace. I feel stuck between honoring my mom's memory and respecting Dad's new marriage. I don't want to be the reason he and Amelia split up, but I also don't think it's fair for Amelia to erase Mom from our lives or prevent us from taking this meaningful trip. So, Reddit, I turn to you for advice. Should I have pushed to include Amelia and Caleb from the start? What should I do now? Should I try to convince Dad to go through with the trip anyway, or should I be the bigger person and suggest we cancel it? I'm lost and could really use some outside perspectives on this mess. Update. It's been 2 weeks since my last post and a lot has happened. I wanted to update you all on the situation with my dad, stepmom Amelia, and our planned trip to Turkey. The night of my birthday, after Amelia tore up my passport, my dad stormed out of the house to clear his head. He didn't come back until late that night. I was still awake, too upset and anxious to sleep. I heard him come in and go straight to his study. He stayed in there for hours, and I could hear muffled arguments between him and Amelia. The next morning, things were tense. Amelia wouldn't look at me, and my dad seemed exhausted. He told me not to worry, that he would sort everything out. For the next week, I tried to stay out of the way as much as possible. I spent a lot of time in my room or out of the house with friends. When I was home, I could hear my dad trying to talk to Amelia, explaining the significance of the Turkey trip and why it was important to him and me. But Amelia wasn't having it. She kept insisting that we were excluding her and Caleb, that we weren't considering their feelings. She even started suggesting that I should move out, saying I was old enough now and it was time for them to be a real family without me. This hurt a lot, especially since the house belongs to my dad. It had been his and my mom's home before Amelia came into the picture. As the week went on, I could see my dad getting more and more frustrated. He tried to be patient with Amelia, but her stubbornness and hostility towards me were wearing him down. I felt guilty, thinking I was the cause of all this trouble. I even considered telling my dad to forget about the trip, just to keep the peace. But then, about a week after my birthday, something changed. I noticed my dad spending a lot of time on the phone and in his study. He seemed more determined, less willing to give in to Amelia's demands. Finally, after about a week and a half of tension and arguments, my dad called a family meeting. He asked all of us, me, Amelia, and Caleb, to gather in the living room. When we were all seated, I could tell this was serious. My dad's face was stern, and he had a folder of papers in his hands. He started by addressing Amelia directly. He said he had tried for the past week to make her understand the importance of this trip to Turkey, but she wasn't willing to listen or compromise. He explained again how it was a long-standing promise between him and me, a way to honor my mom's memory. Then he dropped a bombshell. He told Amelia that he had been planning to change his will to give Caleb an equal share of inheritance with me. He wanted to treat us both fairly, even though Caleb wasn't his biological child. But after the events of the past week, he had changed his mind. My dad pulled out a document from his folder. I assume it was the will he had been planning to sign. To everyone's shock, he tore it up right there in front of us. Amelia gasped and started to say something, but my dad held up his hand to stop her. He explained that he had already made changes to his will. In the new version, Caleb wasn't going to get as much as originally planned. Most of Dad's wealth and inheritance would now go to me. He said this was his final decision. Amelia was furious. She accused my dad of being selfish and manipulative. She said he was using his money to punish her for standing up for her son. But my dad remained calm and firm. He said this wasn't about punishment, but about realizing who truly cared about his happiness and respected his wishes. Then my dad turned to me and said something that made me want to cry with relief. He told me that he had already applied for a duplicate passport for me. As soon as it arrived, we were going to Turkey as planned, just the two of us. Amelia tried to argue more, but my dad shut her down. He said his decision was final, both about the will and the trip. If she couldn't accept it, he said, then maybe they needed to rethink their relationship. The meeting ended with Amelia storming out and Caleb following her, looking confused and upset. I felt bad for Caleb. None of this was his fault, and he was caught in the middle of adult problems. After they left, my dad and I talked for a long time. He apologized for not seeing sooner how Amelia treated me. He said he had been blinded by his desire to have a complete family again, but now he realized that Amelia had never truly accepted me as part of that family. We spent the next few days talking a lot about Mom, our memories of her, and our long-held dream of going to Turkey. It felt good to share these things openly, without worrying about upsetting Amelia. Dad also started making concrete plans for our trip, looking at flights and hotels. Amelia has been mostly silent since the family meeting. She spends a lot of time out of the house, or locked in her room. Caleb still talks to me, but I can tell he feels awkward about the whole situation. I've tried to assure him that none of this is his fault, and that I don't blame him for anything. As for me, I have mixed feelings about everything that's happened. On one hand, I'm thrilled that Dad and I are finally going to take our trip to Turkey. It feels like we're fulfilling a promise to Mom, and I can't wait to experience all the things she used to talk about. On the other hand, I feel guilty about the fallout with Amelia and Caleb. I never wanted to come between Dad and his new family, even if Amelia wasn't always kind to me. And I worry about how this will affect Caleb in the long run, but mostly, I feel relieved and grateful. For years, I've felt like an outsider in my own home, trying to shrink myself to avoid upsetting Amelia. Now, for the first time in a long time, I feel like my feelings and my connection with my dad are being prioritized. Dad and I are now waiting for my new passport to arrive. We've started planning our itinerary for Turkey, and Dad's even started learning a few Turkish phrases. It feels surreal that we're finally going to take this trip we've dreamed about for so long. I'm not sure what the future holds for our family. I don't know if Dad and Amelia will work things out, or if this is the beginning of the end for their relationship. Part of me hopes they can find a way to reconcile, for Caleb's sake if nothing else. But another part of me is relieved at the thought of not having to walk on eggshells in my own home anymore. As for me, I'm focusing on enjoying this time with my dad and looking forward to our trip. I'm also starting to think more seriously about college and my future. This whole experience has made me realize how important it is to stand up for yourself and not let others diminish your worth. I want to thank everyone who responded to my original post. Your comments and support helped me see that I wasn't wrong for wanting this special time with my dad. You gave me the courage to stand firm in my feelings, even when Amelia was trying to make me feel guilty. I know there will probably be more drama and difficult conversations ahead. Amelia isn't likely to accept this new situation without a fight. But for now, I'm choosing to focus on the positive. I'm going to Turkey with my dad, fulfilling a dream my mom had for us. Whatever happens after that, I know my dad has my back, and that means everything to me. Thank you all again for your support and advice. I'll update again after our trip if there are any significant developments. Wish us luck.